What if the end of the world was supposed to happen and it didn't? Imagine being part of an early Christian community, okay? There in the first century, that was told Jesus would return soon. You expected history to wrap up, right? Justice would come, God would set everything right. But instead, persecution got worse. Confusing messages started circulating. Some people even claimed the day of the Lord had already arrived. And you were still here. Panic spread. Had you missed it? Had everything gone wrong? In his second epistle to the Thessalonian church, a short but powerful letter, Paul writes to calm fears and correct dangerous misunderstandings. 2 Thessalonians isn't just about the end times. It's about how to live faithfully when the future feels uncertain. So what's the world behind 2 Thessalonians? To understand this letter, we need to go back to the beginning of the church in Thessalonica, okay? The story starts in Acts chapter 17. During his second missionary journey, Paul arrived in the bustling Macedonian city of Thessalonica. It was a major Roman port city, cosmopolitan, economically active, strategically located along the famous Roman road known as the Via Egnatia. Ideas, cultures, religions flowed through the city constantly. And Paul began preaching in a local synagogue, announcing that Jesus was the promised Messiah. Some Jews believed, which was great. Many Gentiles, non-Jewish people, also believed, that was great too. And a new community of followers of Jesus was born. But the movement quickly triggered opposition. Local leaders stirred up a mob, accusing Paul of proclaiming another king besides Caesar. And the tension escalated so quickly that Paul and his team had to leave the city under cover of night. And that young church suddenly found itself alone, without its founding teacher, founding pastor, and under social pressure. Shortly after leaving, Paul wrote the letter we know as 1 Thessalonians. You can watch the video here later, okay, about it. And in that letter, he encouraged them in their suffering and clarified questions about the return of Christ. But apparently the situation didn't fully settle. More confusion arose and Paul wrote again. The letter we call Second Epistle to the Thessalonians was sent to steady the church. It was written to people caught between persecution and confusion and impatient expectations about the future. And Paul's message is clear. History is still moving toward God's final victory. But until that day arrives, the church is called to stand firm, remain clear-headed, and live faithfully in the present. And here's a quick note about this letter. Many scholars believe this letter, 2 Thessalonians, was written by Paul the Apostle. However, some other scholars consider 2 Thessalonians one of the New Testament's disputed letters. Meaning, there is ongoing academic discussion about whether it was written directly by Paul or by a later follower writing in his tradition that we call Pauline tradition. What's important to remember, in my opinion, is that this discussion does not diminish the significance of this letter. Of course not. From the earliest centuries of the church, followers of Jesus recognized this writing as part of the New Testament and as a trustworthy witness to the apostolic message, a message about Jesus Christ. So for generations of believers, this letter has continued to guide faith, encourage perseverance, deepen the correct biblical understanding of hope and truth and faithful living while waiting for Christ's return. And here are 3 insights you need to know about this wonderful letter. First insight, the day of the Lord was being misused. One of the most fascinating things in this letter is that Paul is responding to a false message about the end of the world. In chapter 2, he asks them, not to quickly be shaken in mind, nor be troubled in your spirit, whether by word or by a letter, supposedly from us, saying that the day of the Lord has already come. Okay, so apparently someone had claimed, perhaps even in Paul's name, that the final day had already begun. Well, this created chaos. If the end had already arrived, then the suffering of the Thessalonians made no sense, right? Had God abandoned them? Had they misunderstood everything? And Paul's response is remarkably calm and very well structured. He reminds them that certain events must occur first. The story of history is still unfolding. You see, early Christians were already dealing with misinformation about the end times, right? With just a few years of Jesus' resurrection. Insight number 2, the man of lawlessness is meant to warn, not to fascinate. Few passages in the New Testament have generated more speculation than the mysterious figure Paul calls the man of lawlessness. He describes someone who will oppose God, someone who will exalt himself and deceive many before the Lord's return. And for centuries, people have tried to identify this figure with specific rulers and political leaders. But here's something often missed. Paul does not introduce this figure to satisfy curiosity, no, about the future. No, he introduces him to prevent deception. The focus of the passage is not the identity of the villain, of course not. The focus is spiritual discernment. In other words, the real danger isn't failing to decode prophetic timelines. No, the real danger is being shaped by falsehood instead of truth. Paul's solution is beautifully simple. Remain grounded in the gospel you received. Truth protects the church. And insight number 3, the end times created a work problem. That's right. Here's one of the most surprising moments in the letter, maybe even funny. Apparently, some believers in Thessalonica had stopped working altogether. And why? Well, because they thought Jesus was about to return. So if the world is ending soon, why bother with ordinary responsibilities, right? Particularly work. Paul's response is blunt. When we were with you, we had already told you this. If anyone is not willing to work, neither let him eat. Well, this isn't harshness, it's pastoral wisdom. Christian hope was never meant to produce withdrawal from life. Instead, the expectation of Christ's return should produce faithful living in the present. Work, serve, build, contribute. Hope in the future does not cancel responsibility today. In fact, it strengthens it. Waiting for Christ is not passive. It is deeply active. And why 2 Thessalonians still matters today then? This letter speaks powerfully into our own very moment. We live in a time filled with speculation about the future, viral predictions, conspiracy theories, and constant anxiety about what's coming next. Paul's message cuts through the noise. Do not panic. Do not be deceived. Stand firm in the truth you received. Keep living faithfully in the ordinary rhythms of life. Biblical hope is not escapism. No, it's steady confidence that history is moving toward justice and restoration of God. And here's the closing line. 2 Thessalonians reminds us that the future belongs to Christ, but the present requires our faithfulness. The early followers of Jesus didn't know exactly when the Lord would return, neither do we. But they were called to stand firm, hold on to the truth, and live with quiet perseverance in the middle of uncertainty. And that calling? Well, that calling hasn't changed, because the most faithful way to wait for the end of history is to live today with courage and clarity and hope.